Here we have Sigma's 50 to 100 Art Series zoom lens. And as you can see, this is a fairly hefty piece of glass, as it has a constant f1.8 in the aperture throughout the zoom range. Now, this is, of course, the stills version. This is an autofocus lens, and Sigma does make a very nice cinema version, which has manual focus. It's also available in additional mounts such as PL. But with the autofocus lens, up front we have the focus ring. And as you can hear, this one does have soft stops. As soon as you get to a stop, at infinity or close focus, the torque does change, besides hearing that, that click. In the middle, we have the zoom ring, and this is, of course, a hard stop. And back here, there's no iris ring, as this is the EF version of the lens. This lens does cover the APS-C or Super 35 formats. Now let's take a look at some tests to view the optical characteristics of this lens. So we're going to look at bokeh first, and going to 1.8, and our lights are nice and round, but some of these flares have definitely ovalized, like over here, which is kind of interesting. Now at a 2.8, those oval flares have turned round, and our work lights, they do remain pretty round at a 2.8. And at 4, our lights continue to look pretty round, nice and round, not a lot of geometric patterns. And at 5.6, of course, some of our secondary flares, they look like they're starting to get some edges. They're starting to stop sign a little bit, but our lights, again, are pretty round. And at an f8, our lights continue to be round, and they just have that hint of that double flare, that double glow. Now let's go to breathing, and boy, does this thing breathe. Okay, we're at 50 millimeters. As we go to, let's go back to the distance. You can see the amount of zooming out the lens seems to do. Now let's go to close focus, and again, the lens seems like it zooms in quite a bit. This is actually a ton of breathing. This lens is known to breathe. By a lot, by an extraordinary amount. And again, it's a stills lens. It's not a cinema lens. It was not designed to not breathe, but this kind of complicates things. Now, if we go to our geometric pattern here, you could really see by how much it's pumping in and out as we go to close focus and go back to distance focus, just how much of a zoom there is. Now looking at distortion, 50 mil is pretty good, as you would expect. I mean, usually 50 millimeters are pretty straight and pretty flat, and this lens does look flat. And at 85, again, distortion is minimal. The checkerboards look pretty nice and straight. Now with flares, we have a little bit of flare action going on with this lens. You can see up here and down below by the gray area. Okay, here we go. Some concentric rings. Not a lot. Modern lenses, they do quite a job of controlling flare and fogging and halation, but we do get a little bit with this lens at 50 millimeters. All right, the Sigma 50 to 100 art zoom lens. As you saw, this lens breathes like crazy. It's an unusual amount of breathing. Now with the cinema version, I don't know if they've corrected that or if it still has that same characteristic. I will say, however, as much as this lens breathes and you may want to eliminate it from your, from your kit, it's actually a very functional lens for interviews, and for a lot of corporate work, that's what I use it for. And that's because, of course, the fast aperture, the 1.8. If you need to get background, if you just need to get out of focus, it, of course, does a great job of that. And, realistically on an interview, your subject is not really moving that much. They're moving about as much as I am right now. And, if you do, even if you do have an autofocus, if they're going back and forth a little bit, the breathing is not objectionable. It's really not that noticeable when it's a very small amount. So for this reason, this is still a very handy lens. It's a nice complement to the 18 to 35 that I keep in the bag. And, it's a good sharp lens. It's a modern lens, of course. You're not looking for a ton of unique character for maybe, a narrative piece, or if you just want to do like a special shot. It's not going to be that lens. It's just a good bread and butter lens. It's a very fast lens for its range of 50 to 100. And in that aspect, it is a very useful lens. Again, maybe not for narrative work, but for interviews or for shots where you're not pulling a lot of focus, it's been a very handy lens for that. Alrighty, thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.